I think one of the biggest mistakes that happens in Gen 1 as well as not Gen 1, because the bad habits get passed down, frankly, is that they go 10 years, they go 20 years and have nothing to show for their hard work.
Hello and welcome to Shades and Layers. I'm your host, Susanne Mariga. Today, we're talking finances. If you're planning to launch a business or you just want to get your cash flow in order, then this is the episode for you. My guest is Susanne Mariga, who is on a mission to empower minority business owners with her Profit First methodology, which centers sustainable scaling. Suzanne is a CPA by qualification and fractional CFO in practice, and she explains what all of that means and how she works with clients during our conversation. She is the CEO of her own award-winning company, the Mariga Group, which received the 2021 Profit First Professional Firm of the Year. She is also the host of the Profit Talk podcast. So what is Profit First method and how can it help you achieve your business goals as the owner of a small business or an aspiring entrepreneur? Well, we will find out all about it from Susanne Mariga.
My name is Susanne Mariga. I'm an owner of a CPA firm here in Houston, Texas. I provide fractional CFO services using the Profit First spend. So like when most people go to their accountants, and they ask, how do I save money on taxes? And the accountant tells them to go out and buy bookshelves or cabinets or buy a car so they can get a $25,000 write-off. We don't tell them that. Instead, we use something called the Profit First strategy. So it really is about building your net worth, making your company profitable, versus trying to save tax dollars by hurting yourself to hurt the IRS. And so we'll look at strategies like, how do you build that net worth without increasing taxes? So maybe if you're a closely held company, sole proprietorship, husband and wife type of business, we might have you maybe max out some of those retirement accounts, right? You can put $66,000 each in those. So that's like, $120,000 going towards your retirement account. And at the same time, you didn't necessarily go out and buy a car. You didn't waste money. You just passed it from the right hand to the left. And so those are the type of strategies that we incorporate.
And how did you get into this business?
So it's interesting because I actually grew up in the world of public accounting. My father was a CPA. Yes. He was a CPA for over 40 years, and he actually hired me when I was 14 to do the bookkeeping and some of the easy taxes for some of his clients. It was a way of getting his daughter from like not running around, right?
Yeah, that's
getting her to
good
focus.
strategy. Yes,
exactly.
Keep them busy.
Yeah. And so I learned from an early age, how to do accounting, how to balance books, how to do some tax returns, how to interact with clients. And he got a great tax write-off. So it ended up being a win-win situation for both of us.
Okay. So this is now becoming a popular strategy. I'm seeing quite a few posts on social media about how Beyonce has Blue Ivy on her payroll. And, that's a way of building generational wealth. Can you just, briefly outline how that works?
So, it's interesting because if you pay someone less than a standard deduction, so if I'm earning less than a standard deduction, it's about $13,000 this year. What happens is I don't have to pay federal taxes. And so what happens is, if you're hiring your child and they're making less than the standard deduction, it's a deduction for the business, right? Because it's payroll expense. But for the child, there's no taxable income because they're literally in the 0% tax bracket because they don't make enough. And it's interesting because depending on how your entity is set up, so like let's say you're a sole proprietor, right? You're a Schedule C. We've all gone into those restaurants and the child is like running the credit card, right? To take your order, right? And so if you're in a sole proprietor situation, you don't actually have to pay Social Security and Medicare either. So it becomes tax-free earnings is what happens. And it's great because, then that child can take those taxable earnings, which happens to be at a 0% tax rate, right?
Yeah.
And they can invest into a Roth IRA account. And so that Roth IRA account, it's an after-tax vehicle. And so now you've created, just like you said, Colano, you created this generational wealth. right?
Right.
Your child is now making earned income. You're getting a tax write-off. Plus, they're investing it in their Roth IRA so they can
Hmm.
use that money to pay for college. They can use it to buy their first home. And if they just have it all together, and they're like, I don't need this money. Now they have money in their retirement, right? So, which is
Right.
really good. And you can also say, hey, you know what? My child's going to take me to Disney World because, I want to go to Disney World as much as
Right.
they do.
Right. So you have this income that is not taxable. Great. So that's one way to build generational wealth. You also speak of stumbling blocks in first generational wealth. So, what are some of the things you advise your clients to avoid, or how do you advise them to get over that for those first stumbling blocks?
So, I'm a fractional CFO, so I get the opportunity to work with a lot of
Mm-hmm,
businesses.
mm-hmm,
And I'm also an author. I'm an author of a book called Profit First for Minority Business Enterprises that I wrote in collaboration under the Profit First brand with Mike Michalowicz. And one of the things that always kind of hit me strange is when I first started my business, I remember like one of my first clients, he came to my office and he was carrying a shoebox. And I remember like starting my business, I had come from big four public accounting. So like your big companies like Anderson and
mm-hmm.
KPMG. And here was my first client
Wow.
bringing me a crusty shoebox that he probably used year after year. And I remember he like plopped down at the chair across from me and he goes, whatever you do, I don't want to pay any taxes. And I remember rummaging through this shoebox and I get to the bottom. There's this piece of paper that looks like, I don't know where he pulled that out of, but, it was a profit and a loss. And this income statement literally said he made no money. It was like negative, like literally the expenses were more than the revenue. And I remember looking at him, I'm like, sir, don't worry, you're not going to pay any taxes. And I remember he like is excited. He comes back a couple of days later to get his tax return. And he's excited because he's getting in this refund. It's called earned income credit.
Mm-hmm.
That step above welfare, you went to work even though you weren't successful type of thing. And he was thinking I did a good job. And I thought, as his tax accountant, I must have did a good job too, because he was getting a refund. And what happened was the next year he comes back to me and it's the same thing. He goes, whatever magic you did last year, do it again this year because I still don't want to pay any taxes.
Right.
And again, I reach in that shoebox. I get to the bottom of that P&L and I'm like, don't worry, sir. You're not going to pay taxes again because you didn't make any money. And then the third year he comes back to me, same shoebox, right? I'm telling you, I might as well like literally do graffiti on the shoebox.
Hilarious.
And he tells me, he goes, he still manages to say the same joke about not paying taxes, but this time it's different because now I know him better, right? He calls me in the middle of the night because he doesn't have time to call me during the day because he's so busy. His employees get paid more than he does. He's still on a car payment. He doesn't own his own house. He rents. And frankly, he has nothing to show for all his hard work. And that's what I think one of the biggest things that, entrepreneurs make in terms of mistakes is they have nothing to show for their work. Literally, I could tell you, many times I would say 1 out of 2, if I look at an entrepreneur, I'm like, most of them will be better off getting a job because they're not producing a profit or even salary
Mm-hmm.
to make it worth it at the end of the day. They'll be better off getting a job in their respective careers. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that happens in Gen 1 as well as not Gen 1, because
Mm-hmm.
the bad habits get passed down, frankly, is that we don't create businesses that supply our life that or have businesses that are in line with the values of why we even created this business. And that's really the biggest mistake that I have is that they go 10 years, they go 20 years and have nothing to show for their hard work.
Can you then get into the profit first method?
Sure. So profit first, it's very I call it kind of like the small plates methodology. It's kind of like Dave Ramsey's envelope system. First thing they tell you when you go on a diet is use smaller plates.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell you to use smaller plates because you're going to eat less food, right? The smaller plate, the less you're going to consume. And so what happens in Profit First is we create this illusion of scarcity through bank accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to create basically 5 bank accounts. I'm going to have one account where all my money is going to come into. I'm going to have a bank account specifically for my profit. I'm going to have a bank account for my owner's pay. I'm going to have a bank account for tax. I'm going to have a bank account for my operating expenses. And what's going to happen is twice a month, I'm going to literally fund these bank accounts based upon predetermined percentages. So I'm going to fund my profit account. I'm going to run my owner's pay account because, I often ask owners, I'm like, who's your most valued employee? If who would leave you today and you're going to be in a world of hurt? And they always say Becky, Sue, and all these wonderful names like John. And I'm like, you know what? Your most valued player is actually you. The day you walk out of this business, nobody gets paid anymore. This business
Mm-hmm.
shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to get paid because if you didn't pay Becky Sue, she wouldn't be coming to work tomorrow. And you shouldn't come to work tomorrow if you're not getting
Mm-hmm.
paid.
Mm-hmm.
So we create that bank account for you, the owner. The next thing is we're going to create an account for taxes because reality is if you are making profit, you are
You
making
gotta
owner's pay,
pay.
you are driving the Bugatti, you're going to have taxes, right?
Right.
And so we're not going to be figuring out how are we going to pay for last year's taxes with this year's money. We're going to fund the tax bank account as we go. And if we're going to use great tax strategy, and so if there's money left over, we can have another profit distribution, but we're going to at least reserve for taxes. And that last account that we're going to create is our operating expense account. This is where we're going to pay our bills from. And literally, most business owners, they tell me every day, I just let me check my bank account before I make that purchase, right? And so we're going to work with that. Let me check your bank account before you make that purchase. And so whatever's left in that bank account, that's what you can use for your operating expenses.
Wonderful. Oh, that's
And so
actually a very sensible method of running your back end, so to speak.
exactly. It's physics, right? It's the
Yeah.
movement of money. It's you move money and it'll be there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And have you always used this method for your clients, or it's something that you came to later on in your career?
So I think when I started my business way back in 2007, I don't think Mike McCallis had wrote his book yet. So I
Right.
don't think that profit first really existed. I actually found profit first for my own self. I was needing that cash management system. I was running a very unintentional business. And I said, you know what, I'll be better off becoming a tax manager at a big four firm.
Hmm.
And literally the system really pivoted how I ran my business. And it was so great because it allowed me to build a really profitable accounting business that I was able to sell at the age of 46 years old and retire and
Wow.
just do what I love, which is the
Yeah.
fractional CFO work and my profit
Wonderful.
first consulting. Because when your business sells, right, it goes for a multiple of EBITDA, which is profit practically. And also like, are you paying yourself? And so it's not just about the revenue, it's about the profit, right? Because your business is an asset and you do want to sell it.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. This is Shades and Layers. My guest today is Susanne Mariga, founder and CEO of the award-winning Mariga Group. Now that you know about the Profit First method, let's find out about Suzanne's entrepreneurial journey, how she prepared to transition from corporate, and how everything is going so far. So how did you prepare for your transition into entrepreneurship?
So in terms of preparing my journey into entrepreneurship, I remember I was like flying to Toronto. I had a job that I was responsible for all the Canadian operations. And I was literally flying there every single week. And the plane from Houston to Toronto, I would call it almost like a jet plane. Like it was one of those ones that had one seat aisle on one side, two seat aisle on
Oh
the other, and I always like try to get that one seat, that was all by itself.
no.
And I remember I was like 6 months pregnant, and I was like, are they gonna notice that I'm 6 months pregnant? Because you're not supposed
Not
to
allowed to
be
fly.
flying on an airplane, right? Third trimester. And nobody asked me how pregnant I was. And so I got on the plane. And I remember like trying to put the seat down and like my belly, I was like not like pointy back pregnant. I was like wide pregnant. I couldn't get the hand bar down. And it hit me. I said, you know what, my life is about to change. I'm not going to be able to maintain this career where I'm traveling every single week. And things like Zoom hadn't really come out then.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it hit me. I was like, I'm going to have to find another option. Otherwise, I'm never going to see my little girl because I'm always going to be in Toronto. And so that was kind of the pivot of my entrepreneurship career. I went on maternity leave. I visited multiple daycares and I practiced leaving her and I just couldn't do it. I just could not do it. And so
Mm.
literally I started my business right after maternity leave.
Oh, they will change your life, all right. And then in terms of the practicalities of, coming up with a business plan, a business idea, and all of that, how did that work for you? How did that process happen for you?
So it was interesting because when I did my first business plan, I remember when I started my business, my husband goes, I want a business plan for how this is going to work. Now that you're leaving your W-2 job and you're asking for money for startup costs, I need a business plan. And I remember like trucking away at like my like 5-year-old Daryl Inspirion thing, like the keyboards, so the keys were about to pop off that thing. And I had this idea that I was going to do a mobile tax service.
Oh.
And I was going to like go to people's houses and do taxes like right on the spot. They wouldn't have to go to H&R Block. And I remember I went to the SBA office because, I wanted to like take in all their knowledge about how do you get sales and how do you like do this mobile tax service. And the first thing the guy told me was, you're going to end up dead. You're going to be on the news. You're going to be on Channel 9 News, literally doing this mobile tax service. And literally everything that went into this one business plan, nothing ever, ever came true of it. And so, my advice is just be flexible, and go with the flow. See what the market wants from you. See what the world is recognizing as your gift, and then go with it.
Mm-hmm. How did you land on fractional C-suite offers?
So, it was really the profit first journey. I saw that a lot of business owners were really good at what they did. They were, probably the best in their craft. But when it came to understanding the numbers, when it came to really strategically analyzing it or building up their in-house accounting team, because usually when we work as a fractional CFO, most of my clients are 7-8 figure entrepreneurs at this point. And, they grew up with their trade, but they're not necessarily strategic about how do I create an accounting function? How do I start to hire in-house AP people or accounts receivable persons? And so what this role does, it literally works with the CEO from a strategic standpoint on the finance side, but we also recruit and train their internal accounting staff.
Okay, I see. And who do you work with? Like, how are you structured and your team, etc.? Who's giving you that support?
So, I have a very strong support team, and again, it's hiring people for what their genius, their brilliance is. So we have marketing support in our team. We have admin support. Really what I do is I try to hire people that complement me and things that I'm not very good at. I'm not very good at graphics. I can do data entry, but they can probably do it better for longer periods of time. So I hire people for that. And so that's really what our team structure is like.
Okay. You were talking about helping companies with strategic planning. So who helped you? Like, did you have a business coach when, taking on this journey?
So I think a lot of it is life experience, right? I did have that privilege of working with like the number one accounting firm in the world, Arthur Andersen at the time, before our friendly folks in Houston got in trouble. I was in their Chicago office, which is their flagship office. I later worked at KPMG. My clients were Goldman Sachs. My clients were Komatsu. My clients were Chase Bank, which was Bank One back in the day. My clients were, the city of Indianapolis. So I was used to working with very large companies. So it made a very strategic decision because of that level of expertise of, you're literally working with these accounts where you're looking at their financial statements, where you're analyzing, where you're talking to their CEOs and CFOs and seeing how they think. So I think that was a very critical experience for me getting that. I think working with, even the small accounting firm with my father, getting that tax exposure was completely valuable. I think for myself, running a 7-figure firm, that was extremely valuable. I got to see what it was like hiring that first employee, hiring that second employee, hiring that third employee, hiring managers, and going through that. And so that was also very valuable. So I think it was taking the accumulation of experience, and that really helped. I think another thing that helped too was hiring people for their specialties. Sometimes we did bring in consultants, HR consultants as we were growing, as we wanted to implement, feedback loops, as we wanted to have critical conversations. What's the best way to have those critical conversations? So we did hire consultants as we grew too, that kind of helped us in places that were a blind spot that we didn't have that support yet in our business. So that's kind of a combination of what took me to that level and allowed me to do that.
Yeah, perfect. And somebody who wants to go into entrepreneurship, what are the top three things that you would advise them to do to get it right? Because it's a very tough journey, right? What should they have in place in order to succeed eventually?
Be flexible. So always
Mm-hmm.
listen to the market. The market is always going to tell you something from a feedback standpoint. And what you start out with will probably not be where you end up. I don't have the mobile truck that does tax returns. So that would be the key. The next thing would be, fall forward, fail forward, right? Fail forward.
Right.
You're going to try things. Sometimes it's going to work. Sometimes you're just going to learn, right? And be okay with just trying things. And then the last thing is, and I think this is probably so important that we don't realize this, especially when we're starting off our careers, we're starting off our businesses, is those relationships that you make along the way are everything. They're so valuable because maybe you meet someone and right now there's just no opportunity to work together. There's no real
Right.
connection, but stay in touch, Facebook friend them, right? You might find that you're working with them or asking them to be on a collaboration in 5 years from now, or maybe
Right.
they're a referral for you or a source of referrals, or maybe someone you're going to be referring to later on for their expertise. But collect people, collect people and
Mm-hmm.
maintain those relationships. I would say are the top three things that I would recommend for entrepreneurship.
Wonderful. Yeah. It's Shades and Layers, and my guest is Susanne Mariga, founder and CEO of the Mariga Group. Next, we talk about the entrepreneurial mindset. We get into artificial intelligence, how it has impacted Suzanne's own work so far, and you will get a chance to see how it may impact yours going forward. And finally, we have the Shades and Layers rapid fire. I've also heard you talk about mindset. So, what should your mindset be when you're embarking on this journey?
So the mindset, and I think what happens in entrepreneurship is there are tons of distractions. There are tons of things that you can say yes to. There are going to be people that are going to ask you to do things that are completely left field, but maybe closely related to what you do. Your no's are more important than your yeses. And at the end of the day, you
Mm-hmm.
have to understand, why are you doing this? What is the things that are really important for you? One of my things was I started my business to be able to spend time with my daughter. And I'm constantly being given offers of, hey, can you take this client where you're going to be doing a ton of travel? And I have to fight that. I'm like, wait a minute. The reason why I started this business to be with my
Yeah.
daughter. And I wanted to really be there for her high school years. And I had grown this amazing 7-figure accounting firm. And I said, but it's starting to take me away from my daughter. And
Right.
and so going back to the why is always really important.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. And then right now, there's all this buzz about how AI can help you to scale your business, etc. How are you seeing small businesses, particularly, implement these tools, AI tools, in order to achieve what couldn't be achieved as quickly in previous years?
So AI is going to be a rapidly changing world. I think when I first saw ChatGPT, I was like, maybe I'll clock out and I'll just never clock back in, is what I thought to myself. And, my assistant, she calls me today and she's working on some copy and she's like, okay, I hope you don't mind, but I kind of ran this through ChatGPT and I was like, ooh, I love this. But so the world of AI is constantly changing. It's going to change from the thought of, being able to write copy to it's going to take the place of some of your traditional accounting too, like that data entry, right? It's going to get more and more
Yeah.
automated.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing how to either master that AI and stay in the forefront so that you're more efficient is going to be extremely important. One of the things that we've been playing with is creating pricing calculators, optimal pricing
Mm,
calculators.
right.
And so how can you harness that is really important.
So what's your vision for the Mariga Group going forward?
So the vision from Rager Group is to help as many entrepreneurs as possible implement
Mm,
profit first. If we can change generational lives, if we can create generations of people that are first time millionaires, first time to build successful businesses that create jobs for their community, I feel like we've had the impact in the world that I'm most proud of. So our goal is to create what we call Gen 1 millionaires, Gen 1 entrepreneurs that are changing the face of what the world looks like. is our goal.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's great. And now we move to the Shades and Layers rapid fire. If you had to write a memoir today, what would it be called and why?
Ooh, I think my memoir would be called Just Do It.
Oh,
And the reason why is, and I know that's like Nike, right? But I think that one of the biggest things that I have always, and it's not me, it's just part of life, right? Whenever you're venturing into something new, right? There's that getting started, right? There's
right.
that mind trash that goes in your mind of,
Oh,
can I do this? I still need to learn more, right? But the reality is, you spend 10 hours thinking about every reason why you shouldn't or why it's going to be so hard, and 1 hour actually doing the thing. And so we'll accomplish more things if we just do it. So that would be the name of my memoir, Just Do It.
fab. And if you had to turn it into a movie, who would you pick for the lead actress?
Oh, wow. That's a hard question. That's a hard one. Oh, wow. I'm going to have to take a rain check on that one.
Okay. We'll let that pass. That's great. But if you had to host a dinner tonight and you were inviting a famous Black woman, living or dead, who would it be?
It would definitely be Michelle Obama. I want the scoop. I
Oh,
want the scoop.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. I felt that deep in my bones. Fantastic. So is there anything else that you'd like to share about Mariga Group or Profit First?
It's been a life-changing journey, Profit First and the Mariga Group. And I would recommend, if you're teetering on entrepreneurship, if you're teetering on changing your business, right, to increase profitability, to have a business that works for you, just do it. Just do it. Just do Profit First.
Perfect. And where can people find you if they want to be your client or just learn more about your work?
So the best way to reach me, there's a couple ways. One is the book, Profit First for Minority Business Enterprises. Great book. Kirkus Review, Publishers Weekly's editor's pick. The other way is if you want to know what percentages a healthy company looks like so you can start your Profit First journey, just go to profitmac.co.
Perfect. And that is all from me today. Thank you, Suzanne, for sharing your story and your wisdom. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend and let me know what you think. My contact details are in the show notes. Thanks again for all your support. I'm Kugano's Kosana Richie, and until next time, please do take good care.